Yo, what is up, everybody? What's going on? What is good? We are now here with the February 13th, 2022 episode of the Boxing Source Radio Show. I am your host, James Bell, the leader of the Boxing Source on social media. Of course, we have a presence on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and through YouTube. And of course, you know that these podcasts are available through iTunes or iHeartRadio or whatever you use to listen to podcasts. We've got, a good number of things that we're going to be talking about during this particular episode here on the Boxing Source Radio Show. We got, a lot of news that did come through over the course of the week. So we will be talking about that. Plus, we will be, going over that main event that did happen over in the UK yesterday when it comes to Daniel Jacobs versus John Ryder. And, the news that we had over the past few days was, really big, of course. And we had the announcement of Errol Spence versus Spence-Ugas for the unified welterweight championship. So we're going to be talking about that. We'll also go over Ryan Garcia's decision to change trainers. Plus, we got a couple more announcements when it comes to fights or potential fights coming down here over the next few months. So there's a lot of content that we have here that we're going to be talking about. But first, wanted to get into the whole thing with Daniel Jacobs versus John Ryder that did take place yesterday over in the UK. It was, live on the Zone. Of course, Daniel Jacobs is the former two-time middleweight champion. And he had his, success somewhat over in the middleweight division, but then, made the decision to move up to super middleweight. He did have his fights against Little Chavez, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., and also Gabe Rosado. And, a lot of people remember that fight with Gabe Rosado because, he didn't really look that good against Gabe Rosado. And it looked like Gabe Rosado had a great fight, had a great game plan, and was able to stick to that particular game plan. But when it came to the scorecards, it was in Daniel Jacobs' favor for that particular matchup. But, he had been inactive for a little bit. Did, go back to his, old trainer, Andre Rozier, after, being with, I think it's Kate Caroma for a little bit. So for this fight, he was with Andre Rozier. And of course, on the flip side, you have John Ryder. Has been there at super middleweight, had a fight against Callum Smith, who was, at one time one of the higher rated super middleweights out there, and gave, Callum Smith a very tough matchup that some people kind of thought that John Ryder could have pulled off. And last year, he was in talks to or fighting potential super middleweight that's out there that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but didn't necessarily happen. So you have him now, in this bout against Daniel Jacobs. And, going into this bout, a few people wanted to see here, where Daniel Jacobs was at this particular point of his career, given that, he wanted to see if he could get a, title shot there at 168 pounds. There was also some talks about him even going up to 175 to potentially fight at 175. But, here at 168, he had to, show something there at that particular weight class. And, going up against someone like John Ryder, I guess they felt like John Ryder would have been a guy that, he would be able to see where he's at this particular point. And, with, those first couple of rounds there, you kind of like saw with Daniel Jacobs that he was, pretty good with his jab, working against a guy that was southpaw. So he was working that left jab a little bit, getting in there with a couple of right hands. But you could see that he was fairly sharp in those first couple of rounds, that, John Ryder really didn't have much, to do trying to get to the inside, and he, didn't necessarily get himself to be able to get to the inside of Daniel Jacobs for those first couple of rounds. But you also did have, Jacobs kind of like, duplicate that particular performance for about 5 or 6 rounds. You really didn't see John Ryder kind of like work on the inside or be able to get to the inside until the second half of the fight. And in that second half of the fight, you did see Daniel Jacobs kind of like have limited activity with his jab, try to fight John Ryder on the inside, but that also, gave the ability for John Ryder to be able to, affect Daniel Jacobs, get in there with some body shots, get some good, overhand left hands on Daniel Jacobs, and kind of like get himself back into the fight, and with that being said, it was able to go through those 12 rounds, and people, kind of like felt like I guess it was a fairly close fight. And you went to the scorecards, and you had one scorecard there that was in favor of Daniel Jacobs with the score of 115 to 113 there, like I said, in favor of Daniel Jacobs. That particular scorecard came from Marcus McDonald. Then you had John Robert Lane with a score of 115 to 113 for John Ryder. And then you had also Mike Fitzgerald with that scorecard of 115 to 113 in favor of John Ryder. Which was fairly surprising to me because I felt like Daniel Jacobs had a pretty good advantage there in the first few rounds, or pretty much that first half of the fight. At least 5 of those first 6 rounds were clearly, to me, in Daniel Jacobs' favor. So you had about 7 rounds, those last 7 rounds, where John Ryder would have had to catch up or probably end up having to sweep those back 7 rounds in order for him to win the fight. But in those scorecards, you kind of like seen that you had one with Marcus McDonald. He had the first 4 rounds for Daniel Jacobs. He had 5 of the first 6 rounds for Daniel Jacobs. And, then for John Robert Lane, he had 4 of the first 5 rounds for Daniel Jacobs, but only had 1 round out of the last 7 for Daniel Jacobs. So that's how he got 115 to 113. And Mike Fitzgerald, which kind of like was a notable scorecard, was that he had the fight even through 6 rounds, and also he had from rounds 3 to round 9, he had John Ryder in all but the 5th round. So that's where you kind of like seen the scorecards be like kind of like all over the place. I pretty much felt like Daniel Jacobs pulled out the fight. I thought he had pretty much like the first 5 rounds on lock. And you could say that he pretty much like had that last round that was pretty much in his favor, and I think it was like the 9th round. You could probably much score for Daniel Jacobs, but I just couldn't really find more than 5 rounds in favor of John Ryder, where you could just pretty much say that hey, he took that particular round, especially when I said he was really playing catch up for those after those first 6 rounds. But with that being said, John Ryder did get the decision win. Was a WBA eliminator of sorts. And it was clarified through the WBA that it would be eliminator for the WBA regular super middleweight championship, not the super title, that Canelo Alvarez currently has. And it's pretty interesting, given that the WBA regular champion is David Morrell. And for those that had been following from last year, David Morrell could have had an opponent last year by the name of John Ryder. Um, they had, I think it was the WBA had ordered David Morrell versus John Ryder, but for some reason it didn't happen. You know, but now with John Ryder getting this decision win over Daniel Jacobs, he is now put in position to be ordered to face David Morrell. So the WBA is going to end up ordering that fight once again. So that's going to be interesting to see how that's going to shape itself because initially John Ryder last year could have had a fight against David Morrell, and for some reason it didn't necessarily happen. But I really didn't feel like I said, I really didn't feel like John Ryder kind of like pulled it off. Yeah, you did see Daniel Jacobs have the incidents where he was kind of like fading in activity on the back half of the fight. He has those particular issues there when it comes to that. That he had to get himself right in order to fight for those 12 rounds. And like I said, he was there back with Andre Rozier, who had trained him for the majority of his career, led him to those middleweight championships that he was able to win. But as of right now, we really don't know what this does for Daniel Jacobs. I mean, he had, a couple of instances where he could have been in position to, I guess, stay at middleweight, but he made the decision to move up to super middleweight a while back. Like I said, he had his performance there against Julio Cesar Chavez, where Chavez ended up quitting and whatnot. And he had the performance against Gabriel Rosado, where a few people, a number of people, thought that Gabriel Rosado won that particular fight. And then now you have this here instance with John Ryder, where I guess some people feel like with him going over to the UK, that was kind of like a instance where it was a tough break for Daniel Jacobs, as he wasn't able to get the decision there over John Ryder. And so now we got to figure out where he is at this particular point. Yes, he did have his fight against Canelo Alvarez a while back, where he did lose by unanimous decision. But outside of that, I don't know what particular option Daniel Jacobs would have at this point. It's kind of like a interesting situation there for Daniel Jacobs, as he kind of has the thing here with Andre Rozier, and he was training for this particular bout. I don't know if it was him going over to the UK, if that had a a effect on him or anything like that. But here in this particular case, I just think that he just ended up with a tough break against John Ryder, and now with him having another loss on this record, especially to John Ryder, that might really kind of like affect what he's going to do here in the future. Because I mean, this is someone that is there that could have tried to contend for a world title at 168 pounds, to try to get a significant fight at 168 pounds, and he wasn't able to do that here. As far as like trying to find something there for Daniel Jacobs or whatnot. So that's what we had in this particular instance. And like I said, I would really be interested to see what happens here with John Ryder as he is able to get the win. It was an eliminator for the WBA, and David Morrell Jr. is the WBA champion, and he had his fight last fight in December, whatnot, and he's there, having his fights in Minnesota, and John Ryder could have had a fight in Minnesota against David Morrell last year, but at the time they didn't. I guess they didn't accept it. So now you really have something where you have to have that particular fight, because this is the same WBA that's trying to consolidate all of those world titles that they have. So, I'd like to see what happens here in the next few months when it comes to John Ryder, and if the WBA goes forward and they order once again the fight between David Morrell Jr. and John Ryder. So you do have that. Like I said with Daniel Jacobs, I'm not sure what happens here in this particular case. I've been a fan of Daniel Jacobs over the years. Of course, he's had his fights, like I said, with Gennady Golovkin, with Canelo Alvarez, against Sergey Derevyanchenko, among many others there in the middleweight division before he, went up to super middleweight. But, as of right now, I'm not sure where he goes at this particular point with this loss on his record. So you did have that. We had other news that we kind of got over the course of the week. Of course, you had that big welterweight title unification coming up April 16th, AT&T Stadium. Errol Spence Jr. versus Spence-Ugas for the WBC, IBF, and WBA welterweight titles. That's going to be a very, very big fight. That's something that, really looking forward to. Did, me personally, already have already bought a ticket. So I'm going to that. But in reference to this particular fight, going back to what had happened over the previous year, the beginning of last year, after Errol Spence Jr. had his win over Danny Garcia, they were, pretty much setting up to have this particular fight, Spence against Ugas, for the unified championships. But they, had something going with Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao said, you know what? I'm going to come back into the ring. And with him saying that he was coming back into the ring, Errol Spence said, hey, look, let's see if we could go for this particular fight against Manny Pacquiao. And at the time, they were able to do that. It was scheduled to happen in Las Vegas, Manny Pacquiao versus Errol Spence. We thought it could have been for the unified titles at that particular point, as Manny Pacquiao was, WBA welterweight champion before, his level of inactivity kind of made him the champion in recess. But WBA made the decision to say Spence-Ugas is a champion, super champion. So they kept that belt on Spence-Ugas. And then, we had the thing with Errol Spence with his eye injury. So he had been, taken out of that bout, and you had Pacquiao versus Ugas. Ugas was able to win. And so Ugas has that win over Manny Pacquiao and was able to have that be Manny Pacquiao's last fight. So now you have your Spence-Ugas, WBA champion, is able to defeat Manny Pacquiao, and is going up against Errol Spence Jr. And this is something where you have somebody in your Spence-Ugas that's a very tough out. Like I said, he had the win over Manny Pacquiao. He had his fight against Shawn Porter, where a few people thought that he did defeat Shawn Porter, but Shawn Porter was able to have that win and retain the WBC welterweight championship at the time. So I'm looking forward to that fight. Looking forward to seeing what these two fighters are going to do. Of course, also with the trainers there, Ismail Salas and Derek James there, that's going to be on both sides of this thing. So we got a lot of things coming up for that particular fight. We got to see how the fight card for Spence versus Ugas kind of shapes itself out to be. And like I said, definitely looking forward to that. AT&T Stadium is going to be rocking for that particular bout. Um, and, a lot of people are looking forward to seeing what happens with the result and what ends up happening after that particular result because, the winner will have 3 or 4 major titles in the welterweight division. And, Errol Spence, he did say, after, I guess, his bout against Danny Garcia, that he had 2 or 3 fights before he was going to move up to 154 pounds. And this would be his first fight. It could have been against Manny Pacquiao, but it didn't end up being that way. But now it's against Spence-Ugas. That's going to be his first fight. A lot of people are looking to see if he wins, that second fight would be against Terrence Crawford. It might be, it might not be, depending on what happens here against Spence-Ugas. If he ends up getting the win, because it's going to be a very tough fight for him. And 2, if he is still comfortable getting himself down to 147 pounds. He is in camp right now. He looks in very good shape in camp, for now at this particular point. Like I said, it's about, 2 months away from that particular bout. And we got to see like how he's doing as far as like, if he's just weight cutting, because remember, before his fight against Sean Porter, he was up to like 185, 187 pounds in order to try to get to 147 for that bout. But now it looks like he's saying, hey, I'm not getting up that high to try to cut myself down to 147. Man, this is what we're going to do, man. We're going to get 147 and strap season, man down, all that type of stuff. There with Errol Spence Jr. And, a lot of people are saying, hey, maybe he could get this fight against Spence-Ugas. If he gets to win against Spence-Ugas, a lot of people are going to demand for the fight against Terrence Crawford next. But we have to wait and see how that's going to shape itself out, But still looking forward to that particular bout. As far as like what is out there for the undercard, we'll have to wait and see. I think the lightweight bout involving Frank Martin could be part of that card, but we'll have to wait and see on that when it comes to those things. So you do have that. Also on the news front, you had Ryan Garcia there in the lightweight division make the announcement that he is not part of the Canelo team as of right now, that he is going to be under the tutelage of Joe Goosen. Of course, longtime trainer Joe Goosen. Of course, people currently know him now as one of the key commentators for the Fox telecast. They're alongside Brian Kenny and Lennox Lewis. But this particular move here for Ryan Garcia ahead of his scheduled bout against Emmanuel Tego on, I think it's April 9th, I pretty much feel like it's not something where they say, hey, he's not really focused on boxing. We have to wait and see. We've seen that he's had a lot of questionable moves over the past, year and a half, 2 years. But when it comes to, Eddy Reynoso, of course, one of the best trainers in the game, of course, trains Canelo Alvarez, but he also trains, Andy Ruiz Jr. He also trains Frank Sanchez Foray. He also has, a few other fighters there as part of the team, and which includes Oscar Valdez, which we'll talk about later. Now, a couple of those fighters have big fights coming up in the near future. So you're going to have Eddy Reynoso, having time with Canelo. He would have had time with Ryan Garcia. He would have had time with, Oscar Valdez. And so what would it have been to try to have that much time with Eddy Reynoso, who might not be able to focus completely on working with you ahead of your upcoming fight that you're going to have against Emmanuel Tego? maybe he doesn't have that. So Ryan Garcia, it looks like he's making the decision to go with a trainer that would have more time with him to be able to focus on, him working on things, sharpening a few things here and there ahead of his fight against Emmanuel Tego. So that's what it initially looks like. But like I said, with it being around 2 months before that fight is scheduled, we'll see how he has to get himself prepared for that particular bout, because if he gets through Emmanuel Tego, that could set him up for a bigger, much bigger fight in the lightweight division later in 2022. Which we got some inklings that it could possibly be that way, but I'm not going to completely co-sign on it. But it looks like there's some real big plans for Ryan Garcia in 2022. Starting here with his bout against Emmanuel Tego. Now, Emmanuel Tego is part of a team that includes the unified lightweight champion, George Kambosos Jr. And George Kambosos, over the course of the past couple of weeks, has been, brought up as someone who could potentially face the WBC lightweight champion, Devin Haney. And over the past week now, it's been a lot of back and forth talk between Devin Haney, George Kambosos, Eddie Hearn, and Lou DiBella. Y'all pretty much follow what's been going on Twitter. Lou DiBella says that they sent an offer. Devin Haney, if you go on the YouTube page for the Boxing Source, we talked with Devin Haney for a brief little minute, and he said that the offer coming from Lou DiBella is all cap. And over the next few days after that, it's been a whole back and forth between Lou DiBella, Devin Haney, George Kambosos, and Eddie Hearn. And as of right now, they're saying, like, or at least Hearn and Devin Haney are saying that, there wasn't necessarily an offer sent, their way. That they're saying that it came through, I guess, the zone, or, they tried to put something through the zone in order to try to make that particular fight. But the thing about it is that Devin Haney pretty much denies it. Eddie Hearn denies it. Bill Haney, father and trainer of Devin Haney, denies it. And it looks like it's a whole mess in reference to this particular instance with George Kambosos Jr. and Devin Haney. But hopefully we could get a few things cleared up on that. We have one, media outlet, or at least I call it a media outlet, Lefty, Lazy Lefty there with Chicken Talk. He has scheduled later this week, he will have Bill Haney on with him for, the Chicken Talk or Twitter Spaces. So we're going to be hearing from Bill Haney on that. But also, here at the Boxing Source, we are working on trying to get Lou DiBella on this week. We will have an interview with Lou DiBella that's scheduled for this week so that he could talk a little bit more about what's going on with George Kambosos and him potentially fighting Devin Haney, or maybe it ends up being somebody else because, from what I had heard, or the reports that have been going out, is that George Kambosos could be in the works of, a 2-fight deal where he has an interim fight to defend those unified titles, and then another high-profile fight in the lightweight division, and it wouldn't involve Devin Haney. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that turns out. We got a few other things here. They had Gervonta Tank Davis. Looks like his fight against Rollie Romero is going to be in the works. Um, heard from the trainers for Gervonta Tank Davis, Coach Kenny, there, of course, and of course, Coach Calvin Ford. They, said earlier in their podcast, the Rise podcast, that Tank Davis is, pretty much set up to face Rollie Romero, and it could be, either May or June, could be June for that. But that particular fight looks like that's going to happen. And also, we're trying to see like whenever that particular fight happens, that we may end up seeing, of course, previous guest on the Boxing Source radio show, a frequent guest of the Boxing Source radio show, Colbert Soldier Breeding, could be in that particular fight card. And he could be involved in a fight against a former world champion, could be a former world champion, maybe from the division, maybe not from the featherweight division. But that's one of the potential opponents that could be in slate for Kobe Breedy. Of course, he had a bout against Suleiman Sagawa last year. It ended up in a no contest over in Washington, D.C. But now he could be set up for a fairly good bout if he is on the card where Gervonta Tank Davis would be ending up facing Rollie Romero. But, that's what we got from that podcast there with Coach Calvin Ford and Coach Kenny there. And, of course, that kind of like adds to the boxing schedule that's really filling itself out there, when it comes to that. And yeah, you did have the whole thing with Canelo Alvarez. He had a particular offer, 2-fight offer, one with Dimitri Bivol, and then back ended with another fight against Gennady Golovkin. Yeah. And the other option would have been what could have potentially be planned as Jamal Charlo, a fight against Jamal Charlo, and then maybe a fight against David Benavidez there for Canelo Alvarez this year. Pretty much depends on, what the asking price is going to be there for Canelo Alvarez. Yes, he did, kind of like earn around $40 million for his fight against Caleb Plant last year for the undisputed super middleweight titles. But now it looks like his price tag has gone up, as the pay-per-view for Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant was likely one of the most successful pay-per-views of 2021. I think we had around 800,000 pay-per-view buys. So with this next thing coming up here for Canelo Alvarez, it could be either him fighting Jamal Charlo or him fighting, WBA champion at 175, Dimitri Bivol. And, we do have the whole incident with Jamal Charlo, who, had been booked on the charges for, domestic domestic dispute, which was, involved a family member. Okay. It wasn't, anything in reference to his immediate family, brother, sister, wife, that type of thing. No, wasn't that. It was like cousin or whatnot, but he ended up having a thing with the charges. Now, when that initially had been reported, a lot of people kind of like was thinking, oh man, look at this, man, it's Jamal Charlo. He got in trouble again, whatever it is. And, he was a potential opponent for Canelo Alvarez. And now with this whole thing, man, looks like it is pretty much shut down. Slow your roll. Okay. Y'all must have forgot. Yeah, I used that quote. Y'all must have forgot. Sergey Kovalev was dealing with some domestic issues. And he was able to get a fight with Canelo Alvarez. You had a few other fighters that have gone through this same thing, with, either, like a domestic violence or any type of incident similar to that. and they were still able to have a fight or a few fights in while they were dealing with the whole legal issues, right? And I just mentioned Rolando Romero, who was dealing with some issues himself that kind of like had him scratched from the originally scheduled bout that he was supposed to have against Gervonta Tank Davis last December. But now that all of that's cleared and out of the way, he's able to, see. We'll see if he has that particular bout against Tank Davis here later this year. Like I said, it's going to either be in May or June, right? So when it comes to Jermall Charlo, yeah, he has to have this whole thing cleared, situate itself. We'll see how that goes. But then after that, we'll see if they make that particular decision to have him facing Canelo Alvarez, or he could end up facing someone like Caleb Plant, at 168. He could fight maybe a David Benavidez at 168, where they had, of course, a little bit of a back and forth in the past. Also, there's also Durrell at 168. You have Caleb Truax at 168. A lot of options are there for Jermall Charlo at 168 if he, plans to move up. You know what I mean? So there's that there in reference to Jermall Charlo. But on the flip side, you have the thing with Dimitri Bivol being a potential opponent for Canelo Alvarez, and there are a few folks that feel like Dimitri Bivol would be a very tough out for Canelo Alvarez. Me personally, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I think it would be because of, with Canelo Alvarez, the way that he throws his punches and his power shots would really be a problem for Dimitri Bivol, even though Dimitri Bivol is, fairly good boxer. But it's one thing to throw punches, but it's a whole nother thing if you're able to take punches. And I'm not so sure Dimitri Bivol will be able to take a lot of those shots from Canelo Alvarez. But there's also the other thing as far as like from a business perspective, which would be, more lucrative there for Canelo Alvarez. Maybe it's something where he hits a bigger, deal with the zone for that 2-fight deal, or maybe it's through, what it would be Showtime or Fox or whatever it would end up being there if he fights Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez. Me, I feel like having the fights against Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez would probably be something that would garner more interest than fights against Dimitri Bivol and Gennady Golovkin. And I'll just put it out there right now. For those that know me, right? I'm sorry. I don't want to see another fight between Canelo and Gennady Golovkin, man. I just do not want to see it. I'm not down for it. You can't call me Chris Mannix. Yeah, that's right. I said Chris Mannix. Listen, we got to stop with this whole thing about Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. When was the last fight that they had, right? That was like, what, almost 5 years ago? 5 years ago was that second fight. 4 or 5 years ago, and people are still talking about if Canelo Alvarez is going to face Gennady Golovkin. Come on, man. We like, folks. I'm sorry, but we gotta let it go, man. We gotta let it go. Okay, we gotta let it go. Let's have Canelo Alvarez face some other guys. Let's have Gennady Golovkin face some other guys there in the middleweight division. Okay, I know that he was scheduled to have a unification bout at 160 pounds, but outside of that, we haven't seen Gennady Golovkin, in there with a few of the other guys that have been long-standing champions like Demetrius Andrade and like Jermall Charlo, but he wanted to go the route, of facing, someone else there, that had been the champ, had lost the belt, and got a belt back, and maybe it might have been a little bit more lucrative for him to go that route. Okay, maybe I understand that, but after that, like you got to be able to say, hey, you got these guys like Charlo and Andrade, and they've been out there in the middleweight division for a good little minute. And you mean to tell me that they can't get a fight against Gennady Golovkin? Okay, that that I don't necessarily understand. And for those that are fans of the sport, here's one thing I'm going to put on wax. Okay, we got to stop with this whole thing of they didn't quote unquote earn a fight, or the other thing is who did they beat? We got to stop with that. We're only getting that with certain fighters. And me, as a media person and as a fan of the sport, we got to stop that because it only seems like it happens when it comes to certain fighters, but y'all don't say the same thing about other fighters that are out there in the division or in these other divisions that get a certain amount of treatment. So that's one thing that I wanted to say on here on wax. Okay. So however y'all take it is how y'all take it. But we gotta cut it down when it comes to naming specific fighters and saying, oh, who did he fight in order to earn a shot against such and such, when y'all don't say the same thing about other fighters that end up fighting those guys. So that's one thing that we gotta clear up. That's one thing that we gotta sort out. You know what I mean? So that's pretty much what we have there in the middleweight and super middleweight divisions that may end up getting themselves sorted out here in a little bit. But you also have one other big fight. At least it's a big fight to me in the 154-pound division. Yeah, March 19th, we're scheduled to have the rematch for the undisputed super welterweight championship. Mel Charlo, Brian Carlos Casano, scheduled to be in Los Angeles, March 19th. That is going to be a very, very good fight. Of course, the first fight ended up in a draw. Very good fight between those two combatants. So we have the second fight between those two coming up on March 19th. But also, we have in April a pretty much a final eliminator of sorts in the WBC. Sebastian Fundora versus Erickson Lubin. Man, that's going to be a fight. Both of those guys were based in Florida. Both of those guys, had been close by. Had like a little bit of a rivalry here and there from back in the amateurs and whatnot, and now going into the pros. And now we see them getting in the ring, and they're going to have their fight. You had, of course, Sebastian Fundora in his last bout. Some people pretty much thought he really struggled in his last bout, and that he almost didn't win that fight. Erickson Lubin, had been, of course, he had his one shot at the world title, had got knocked down the first round, and has been building himself back up, over the course of those things. So you do have the instance where, Erickson Lubin is trying to get himself back into a shot at a world title there at 154 pounds. He did have his stoppage win over Jason Rosario as part of the undercard for Tank Davis versus Mario Barrios last year. And that was a very big win for him to kind of like set him up for this particular bout against Sebastian Fundora. Fundora, of course, is that big, tall, 6'7" guy that's out there at 154 pounds, and my thing with that is that you got him that's long and lanky, throwing a lot of punches, very active with his punches, as long as they're able to land. But like we saw in his, fight against, what is it, Sergio Garcia, that uh, once you get to the inside, you could pretty much affect him there a good little bit. So I'm looking to see if Erickson Lubin could get himself on the inside and work, Sebastian Fundora, and have Sebastian Fundora in a little bit of trouble. But if Fundora is able to land early and land often, that could be some trouble there for Erickson Lubin. The thing about, what you got to have with Sebastian Fundora is he's able to be active with his hands, but you got to be able to see, if you see it's coming in, you try to move around and then get to the inside, or try to see if you could duck the jab and then come in with a counter. That could be something there that Sebastian Fundora would have issues with. But Erickson Lubin, he has kind of like improved himself big time since that loss there to Mel Charlo. So like I said, this is really like a big shot here for Erickson Lubin to get himself back in position to fight for a world title once again. And pretty much kind of like depends on what happens with the result of the rematch between Mel Charlo and Brian Carlos Castaño. So we got like a good amount of fights coming up here over the next few weeks in the back half there. As like I said, you got the Spence-Ugas, you got Fundora versus Lubin there. So and you're gonna also have a good amount of fights that's gonna be coming up in March. Like I said, the Charlo Castaño 2 there in March 19th is one that I'm really focused on there as well. So you do have that. You also got to see what happens with the card that's scheduled for a couple of weeks. We were scheduled to have Chris Colbert against Roger Gutierrez for the WBA 130-pound title, but Roger Gutierrez has been removed from that particular bout due to COVID tests. Looks like, but still, trying to get in a replacement opponent for Chris Colbert. As of right now, we haven't had the official announcement as to who that opponent would be. But hopefully, we do get that announcement, and that particular card is salvaged, because you also do have Gary Antoine Russell versus Victor Postol as the co-feature bout, and that is a fight that I'm looking forward to seeing. Victor Postol, former world champion there at 100, and he was there at like 140 pounds whatnot. Did end up losing to Terrence Crawford when they had that unification bout. We did have also the loss against Jose Carlos Ramirez too, who was former world champion there at 140 pounds. And in both of those fights, ended up going to decision. But Gary Antoine Russell is one of the better young fighters there at 140 pounds, which is a very deep division. And there are a lot of good guys that are on there with, Gary Antoine Russell, Sabril Matias, Brandon Lee, among many others. But this particular bout here for Gary Antoine Russell could be something where, he shows how good he is against a guy that has a lot of experience and is a former world champion. So hopefully we do see that happening here in a couple of weeks. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that fight if that does end up happening. But that is what I wanted to, drop here in this particular episode of the Boxing Source Radio Show. Had to get through, a lot of that news that's going down here in the sport of boxing. We're going to have a lot more coming up, hopefully scheduled on through YouTube or another outlet tomorrow. We scheduled to have Prince Albert Bell And also, like I said, we're trying to get Lou DiBella on with us in an interview that will be posted later on our YouTube channel, The Boxing Source. So be sure to follow The Boxing Source on YouTube, where you'll be able to get all of that content and more here. So be sure to check that out. Okay. All right. Now, with that being said, that is what we're going with here in this particular episode of the Boxing Source Radio Show. Um, like I say at the end of every show, the point of boxing is to hit and not get hit, not to sin and trade. On that note, folks, I'm out. Have a good evening, everybody.